Hi, this is Bruce Milne, Chief Marketing Officer for Pivot3. Thanks for taking some time with us today. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Pivot3 and how we do what we do and why it's so different and valuable for customers. Now, I get a chance to talk to prospects and customers pretty regularly in the span of a day. And what they tell me about their challenges fits into a few key themes, and I've distilled it down. They use different words to describe it, but it typically falls into these categories. The first category is that they're concerned about the number of requests they're getting for new business services to be able to support new applications from the lines of business. That is outstripping their capacity to support all those new requests. The second challenge I hear is the volumes inside those that are implicit in those applications are extraordinary. The number of application requests they get, the data that's implicit inside that application, the amount of data that's being created by those applications and stored by those applications, the number of transactions inside those applications are growing exponentially. And that's a challenge for IT that was architected to support applications on a much smaller scale. The third challenge that I hear is that the data center that supports that IT organization is made up of generations of technology that were acquired over time and not really designed to work together. They weren't integrated in the first place, so they spend a disproportionate amount of their time reintegrating the components in the data center. So in a typical three-tier architecture, you're having to constantly reconfigure and reorganize that data center to be able to support new requests for business services. In some cases, it doesn't scale very well because you bought a certain amount of capacity. To get more capacity, you have to go out and get another piece of architecture. That's a challenge for many IT organizations who are working on a budget. And the last challenge is people. You have to have advanced IT skills to be able to do things like reconfigure the data center. And that's not an easy set of skills to find. And more importantly, it's hard to retain them once you've got them. These are the effects that customers are reporting to me. The IT demand is outstripping their capacity to support it. They'd like to be an agile IT organization, but the capacity to do that for their lines of business just isn't there. The business responds by, they just don't have the patience or the time to wait for IT to actually support their requests, and so they move it outside. They outsource that IT request to cloud services, what they call shadow IT in many cases. And IT is very concerned about this because it takes away their ability to control the things that they're responsible for. The cost of an application and the infrastructure to support it. The compliance with either regulations or with internal policy. The risk associated with moving that outside and the data protection, for instance, or the privacy of the information. SLAs, meeting the SLAs for those applications is not something that they can control if the application's been outsourced to the cloud. So there's lots of concern with IT organizations about this notion of shadow IT and moving things to the cloud without some level of organization and management. And the last challenge, of course, is that they lack the skills to be able to really make any material change here. So it's difficult to attract advanced IT skills, especially if you're a state and local government or you're an education organization or you are a small to medium enterprise. And it's even more difficult to retain those folks when those types of organizations are not the employer of choice for advanced IT skills. And of course, these challenges are only getting worse as the volume increases. And there's no question, I think Gartner says that something like 85% of every business will be 100% dependent on IT in the next 2 or 3 years. I'd probably say that that's understating the challenge, that most organizations are completely dependent on their IT for their very existence now. Just think about any organization where they're collecting data and having to analyze it. That's an IT function. And so it's only getting worse as the volume increases. What you call hyperscale organizations like Amazon and Facebook and Google have found a way around this challenge, right? They have organizations that they grew from the ground up to support enormous volumes of data and applications. And the way they did that was not to take three-tier architecture and deploy it in their data centers and work with proprietary technologies. They built their own. And they built it on commercially available, commoditized, off-the-shelf hardware so that they could scale it on any dimension whenever they needed to. And that's how Google can be agile enough, for instance, to try out a business service like Google Home. And if Google Home is a popular service, then they will expand it and they will continue to grow the capacity to support that application. They'll test run it. If it works in sort of mode 2 engineering style, if it works and is popular, then they will continue to invest in it and grow that. That level of flexibility and agility is something that customers that we talk to are looking for in their own IT organizations. And this capability is now commercially available for other organizations beyond the hyperscale companies. And that technology is called hyperconverged infrastructure. It's very distinct from three-tier traditional architecture in a number of ways. First of all, Three-tier architecture is very cumbersome to deploy, and you have to integrate the components. So your storage is separate from your servers, is separate from your networking, and you have to make all those things work together. Requires a set of skills, advanced IT skills like network capacity planning, and network engineers, and storage capacity planning, and so forth. Conversely, hyper-converged infrastructure pools all your resources and manages them under a single pane of glass. Increases the simplicity of deployment and management of IT resources enormously. It's costly to administer three-tier architectures. It's very inexpensive to administer hyper-converged infrastructure. So the economics and the simplicity are really the value proposition that customers are looking for as they transition to a much more agile style of IT to support those increasing requests from the lines of business. Pivot3 is one of the leaders in the market. We're the #1 leader in performance, in scale, and efficiency for hyperconvergence. We are #1 in terms of the largest hyperconverged deployments. That's based on primary research from both Forrester and Gartner, who've gone out and talked to customers and looked for the largest deployments in the world. They've both recognized that Pivot3's deployments, like 25 petabytes and 8.5 petabytes, these are the largest hyperconverged deployments anywhere in the world. We're #1 in storage efficiency. For a 6% tax on your storage capacity, you get the equivalent of 3 copies of data with Pivot3. For anybody else in our space or even in traditional infrastructure to do any sort of replication in order to have copies for risk management, for disaster recovery for your infrastructure, it requires exact duplicate copies of your data. In some cases, that reduces your effective utilization to about 33%. So by contrast, Pivot3 with a 6% tax gives you 93, 94% effective utilization of your resources. That's an enormous gain in efficiency in what is a very expensive resource. And we deliver 6 times the performance from the same equipment, from the exact same box as the closest competitor in hyperconvergence. The number of technologies and innovations that we apply in order to get these kinds of results, but we are clearly the leader in performance, scale, and efficiency. Now that proven leadership you can actually point to around the world in all sorts of vertical markets. A lot of this has to do with our legacy, which is in data capture and management of streaming media, video from video surveillance cameras. Pivot3 was created at a time we were building the first generation of software-defined storage and looking for large collections of data in order to require some of the advances that we were building into this technology. And that was at the same time, it was coincident with the transition from analog video cameras to digital video cameras, IP video. And so these enormous collections of data started to be collected by our customers. And you can see here in some of these examples, Chicago Metro, 8.5 petabytes of data being managed by a single person on 275 nodes. It's been up and running for 5 years. Even through drive failures, they've never lost a frame of data. They've never had any degradation of video quality. That's the kind of resilience that Pivot3 provides. That's the kind of dependability that our customers who consider their assets, their video assets, their data assets, mission critical, absolutely require. That kind of proven leadership in organizations around the world, many of them referenceable publicly, is a really critical part of the value proposition of Pivot3. Now, how do we do this? Well, we take the resources in all of those different components, those different boxes, those different nodes, and combine them in a virtual storage area network. We pool all the resources together so they can be used by applications that require more or less capacity depending on the nature of the application and the specific time. In some cases, applications require more resources at some times than other times. And we could dynamically reprovision those resources and make them available when that application needs them. What this means in the case of, for instance, video surveillance data capture is that you can point all the cameras at the same array, and we can collect all the data regardless of the rate of ingest because we are designed to be able to support enormous volumes of IoT and streaming media. We provide 6 nines resilience and reliability. Again, no downtime, no loss of data. Sustained performance, never dropping any frames. Again, this is a byproduct of architectural decisions we've made throughout our history to be able to support these enormous volumes of data. Again, nobody else in this industry is designed to be able to support that kind of volume, that kind of ingest rate, and make sure that you never lose an ounce of data. We're highly scalable. Organizations can deploy as few as 3 nodes and then scale effectively infinitely, whether it's scale on the dimension of processing or on the dimension of storage, or both, and you can scale those independently. One of the typical traps of hyperconverged infrastructure is you have to scale both storage and processing together. Not so with Pivot3. You can scale those independently. And that's a huge advantage to organizations that may have requirement to scale in one direction or the other as their organization grows, but they don't want to scale on both. and lower cost and complexity. Again, Pivot3 is designed for organizations that have fewer IT skills, people who aren't necessarily IT experts. Now, we've actually proven this in the labs, and if your customers are concerned about the ilities, the scalability, the reliability, and so forth, we can actually demonstrate this in head-to-head competition against our primary competitor. In this case, we took our primary competitor's infrastructure on the same types of boxes. These were Dell boxes. They had 4 of them in place against 3 of, we took the exact same infrastructure and put our operating system on it and ran 3 nodes of the exact same design. We ran the exact same workloads as their publicly stated numbers, and what we found was we were able to provide 2.5 times the database IOPS using the same infrastructure, 9 times the throughput of sub-millisecond transactions, and 62% lower latency on key applications. That is, again, using the exact same infrastructure, only 25% less of it. That's an enormous gain in performance, and of course, the economic value proposition here is disruptive. There's no comparing the same 2 applications, the same 2 infrastructures when you get that kind of improvement in performance. We have a number of other lab results as well to be able to demonstrate our leadership. 62% lower latency, as we talked about, 6 times overall performance over other hyperconverged infrastructures, 2 to 3 times the density of virtual desktop applications hosted on the same infrastructure. So again, that upsets the economic value proposition completely of all our competitors' offerings when you can get 2 to 3 times the density of virtual desktops on the exact same infrastructure using our system. 94% usable capacity in terms of storage, 89% of IOPS maintained even when you have what they call degraded modes. That is when devices fail, like drives or nodes. And you could lose up to an entire node and a couple more drives with our system and never see any degradation in performance. So those types of specifications and results really lead customers to understand that we are the leader in performance and resilience in the hyperconverged market. One of the key differentiators for Pivot3 was designed anticipating the evolution of the hyperconverged market. The market's evolving such that, initially customers would deploy hyperconverged for a single application, like virtual desktops, let's say, or BCDR, business continuity disaster recovery, because they were trying it out to see if this technology really had the ability to deliver the promise of economics and simplicity. What they found was it was simple to use. It did provide economic benefits, and so they wanted to apply that to more and more of the workloads in their data center. And so what we found is, and this sort of bears out our prediction, that customers are trying to deploy more applications on the same infrastructure. But not all applications are created equal. Some have higher demands, some are more process intensive, some are higher priority than others. And so what we've deployed is not sort of setting thresholds and limiting the amount of resources that each application gets from the infrastructure, but we've implemented a model of policy management where you can define what the importance of a particular application is. And as a consequence of that level of importance, that priority, that application will get the resources it needs to meet its SLA based on its relative priority against all the other applications. What this means is your most critical applications will get the resources they need to meet their SLA at the expense of lower priority applications. That might mean that email takes a little bit longer to send when your batch processing of transactions is happening, and that's your top priority application. When those resources are no longer needed by your top priority application, they get redistributed back to the other applications for them to do their work. What this means is our customers only have to buy to the peak capacity requirements of their critical applications, not to every application. It also means they can scale because they can set the priority of applications as opposed to having somebody set thresholds of how many IOPS each application is going to get. What that necessarily means is those applications will run out of capacity sometimes, and somebody would have to go and manually adjust the amount of resource available to that application in order to make it run. What we've done is automated this, so when customers are managing thousands or even tens of thousands of virtual machines, they can set and forget these applications and make sure that they get the resources they need to meet their SLAs. That's completely unique in the marketplace. You won't find any other hyperconverged vendor in the market doing this with such an advanced set of artificial intelligence and machine learning type applications as Pivot3. This is really the ideal platform then for deploying a hybrid cloud where you've got a number of applications being hosted both inside the organization and outside the organization. You are consolidating workloads on the same architecture, but also using burst capacity out there in the cloud. And Pivot3 can be the orchestration engine that determines what can move out to the cloud, when it can move there, which tier it should be using in the cloud. And a lot of our cloud connectors and our workload mobility applications are designed to do exactly that, to help customers take advantage of the many clouds they use to support their business. In many cases, customers need burst capacity at certain times, but not all the time. And if they try to do that manually, it gets very expensive because they get orphaned VMs, they're not sure which tier to use and that sort of thing. Pivot3 is designed to make intelligent choices for them and then automate the execution of those choices so that applications and data can move back and forth to the cloud. Ideally, when the cost structure is correct, when the constraints are met, Pivot3 can decide where the right location is to store data and when the right time is to move it there. And this is what we call our intelligent hybrid cloud engine. Again, unique in the marketplace. It combines the notion of policies, business policy management, as I mentioned earlier, analytics to determine where the appropriate placement of workloads and data is against the constraints that the lines of business have set for it. There might be constraints like it's HIPAA data. As a consequence, it has to be resident on-prem, or it has to have data services like encryption at rest and in motion because this is personally identifiable information. All these rules have to be applied to make sure you know where's the optimal place to place this data and that it's going to meet its SLAs in terms of availability and response time and so forth if you place it there. Pivot3 can assist in all of that and then actually take the action to move that data or those applications to that location and back. One of the challenges we hear from customers all the time about embracing the cloud is it's difficult to get my applications back once I migrate them to the cloud. Pivot3 is automating all of that and orchestrating all of your use of the many clouds that basically compose your IT infrastructure. So let me use an example to show you what I mean here. And this was based on a customer example. It was the Southern New Hampshire Health Services. We were talking to the CIO, who's actually a medical doctor. And the CIO presented a challenge to us which wasn't in technical terms, it was in business terms, because that doctor thinks in terms of patient care. He said, listen, my physicians spend way too much time logging into their applications to see patient records. It can take up to 11 minutes for them to log into all their applications at the various places they do that, in the clinic, in the ER, in their office, and so on. As a consequence, they're spending up to 2 hours a day because they log in maybe 20 times. 20 times times 11 minutes, that adds up pretty quickly. Up to 2 hours a day of a valued physician's time logging into systems. I need a way to reduce that amount of time so that they're spending more time in front of patients. These are uniquely skilled individuals, and I need them spending their time on patient care. Well, the challenge, of course, was to determine what are the constraints on this application. We have personally identifiable, HIPAA-compliant data that with a risk of loss of data at the point of care. We need response time. We need the desktop to render the images very quickly because you're talking about PET scans and CAT scans and so forth. That's really, really dense data, so we needed to have a highly performant application at the point of care regardless of where it was. So all these constraints on the application. But ultimately, what ended up happening was we architected a virtual desktop implementation with fast pipe and enough server capacity to support the boot storm that would happen first thing in the morning as the physicians came online. That was a technical answer to a business requirement. And we believe that the system should be able to make these decisions from shared services available in your cloud catalog and assemble that application dynamically for you. This is the promise of Pivot3 and the many clouds that customers are using to support their business today, to automatically orchestrate these business services and be able to deliver that level of agility in IT that is unprecedented in the marketplace. Now, of course, what we find is that customers initially deploy us for remote office, branch office deployments or video surveillance, but ultimately find they want to deploy us for more and more of their applications once they see the simplicity and the economics of deploying hyper-converged. And so you see us being deployed in smart cities type deployments at a very large scale with huge amounts of data, sensor data, streaming media, all sorts of applications for access controls and so forth, high volume IoT applications, any sensors that are producing huge volumes of information. Pivot3 is uniquely qualified to be able to collect that, ingest that at the rate that it comes into the systems. Cloud computing, as we've talked about. Server virtualization. Many customers just as they're transitioning their old three-tier architecture to new technology, they want to virtualize more and more of the applications that are in their data center and be able to move VMs around and have ultimate mobility of those applications. Hyperconverged is a unique platform that facilitates that for them. So we see a lot of basic data center consolidation and rationalization happening on top of hyperconverged. Keep in mind that in many cases, for the cost of renewing maintenance on an old EMC storage area network, for instance, that they could buy a brand new array of Pivot3 hyperconverged infrastructure. So a lot of customers are recognizing that advantage and moving to this new technology where they can start small and scale quickly as their business requires it. We see customers deploying virtual desktops. Increasingly, we're seeing customers deploy applications you wouldn't have put on hyperconverged in the past, like database and analytics applications, which makes perfect sense as we get into smart cities, safe cities type applications, or smart campus, smart casino, where customers are doing facial recognition, license plate recognition, all sorts of analytics on the video that they're collecting. This can work in a retail context for improving efficiency of retail. It can work in a security context for identifying when there's a risk. All these applications are now supported by hyperconverged. Pivot3 is uniquely qualified to be able to scale to the performance and the resilience that those customers need. I'm Bruce Milne, Chief Marketing Officer for Pivot3. I want to thank you for your time today. Please contact us if you have any questions or would like to discuss your needs for hyperconverged infrastructure.